If you're in the market to buy or sell a home in 2026, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about how to get the best deal on a home, what's actually happening in the market, and how I would approach the transaction. Because the truth is, 2026 is now, for the first time in several years, an excellent time to buy. In fact, I think it's probably one of the best times to buy since 2020. I'm going to talk about whether or not we're in a buyer's market or a seller's market, how to handle seller concessions, and how to approach the whole equation to know that, number one, you're getting a good deal, you're not overpaying, and you're not going to be stuck making a bad decision on a bad purchase. So first off, let's talk about the state of affairs as it comes to interest rates. Now, if you haven't been following the market closely, the Federal Reserve has kept rates very high. And although the Federal Reserve doesn't set interest rates for mortgage rates, they don't technically have anything to do with each other. They are very closely related because mortgage rates for you are an expense, but for people that hold mortgage-backed securities, they're an investment. And so mortgages are always competing with treasury bills, and that's why mortgage rates will always be higher than treasury bills, and the rate that they pay out is set by the federal funds rate. And so because the Fed funds rate now is in the mid-threes, that means that mortgage rates for the first time in 3 years are now under 6% or hovering around 6%. We have seen a lot more buyers coming into the market because things are starting to get a little bit more affordable. And on top of that, sellers are actually starting to get a little bit more aggressive because prices in most markets have come down 15 to 20% from their peak, especially in markets that experienced a significant bubble during the pandemic. Now, I'm not going to be talking about all those markets in this video, but if you want to deep dive on several markets, there's going to be a video linked at the end of this video where I talk about all of the housing market data that goes into determining prices. And this is things like what's happening with inventory, what's happening with days on market, what's happening with median list price. So you can actually see what's happening. And I'll cover markets like Denver and Phoenix, Tampa, Las Vegas, Southern California, Northern California, all of Florida, half of the East Coast, as well as Texas in the South, and a lot of the markets that were really impacted during COVID. And again, I'm not going to cover that in this video, but I will cover that in another video that's linked at the end. So generally speaking, nationwide right now in the United States, we are in a pretty solid buyer's market. Now, this is going to be true in markets that have record high inventory, have established a history of median list price coming down. So if you look in markets like Tampa or all over Florida and Texas, Denver, Colorado is one of the heaviest hit markets. Prices are finally starting to come down. For example, in Denver, we're down about 15% in terms of median list for the metropolitan area, which means that a house that was priced at $600,000 is now somewhere around $500,000. And it might not seem like a big drop, but you also have to remember that with mortgage rates dropping, the markets change very, very quickly, because what happens is as prices come down, most people are not paying attention and things still seem unaffordable. They still have this idea in their head that, oh, $500,000 is too much for a home in Denver. $400,000 is too much for a home in Denver. And then interest rates creep below 6% like they have right now. And then they creep below 5. And then before you know it, they're creeping, into the mid 4s and below 4. And suddenly we're in an extremely affordable market. And then everything ramps back up. There's no inventory because everyone's buying, because interest rates are low, which means money is cheap and it's easy to afford something. And so everyone jumps into the market. And so do you want to be the moron that gets in when everyone's trying to buy, or do you want to be proactive and buy now, get a good deal on a property so that you can refinance 2 or 3 years from now when rates keep coming down further as things keep softening and the Fed keeps lowering rates? For me, I'd rather be in a position where I own the property and then refinance when rates come down, because this is going to put you in a much better position. And this is what I did on my commercial property when I refinanced it. And I went from buying a property with hard money when I got into it, where I had a 10% rate that I was paying on my first, and I had a 2-year balloon to refinance out anyways. By the time I actually refinanced, I ended up doing it twice. Once was a cash out, so I literally had no money in the deal when I was done with it. That interest rate was around 3%, which made that property extremely affordable for my business to rent. Now, generally speaking right now, because we have such high inventory, what this means is that we have a buyer's market. And so because we have a buyer's market, half the sellers are still not very flexible in their price, and they don't realize that the market has changed. They don't realize that no one cares what their neighbor sold their house for 3 years ago, because that's not what their house is worth now. Because 3 years ago, when their neighbor sold, when interest rates were going for 3.5%, and so the person that bought that house was able to get a much lower payment even than they were today if that home price was lower with a higher rate. That's what people don't understand. If you take a $700,000 house and you bought that house with a 3% rate, you'd actually be in a better position than if you bought it as a $600,000 house with a 6% rate. You might say, yeah, but you'd be better off paying $600,000 because you owe less. If you can afford the payment, that's what's important. Because if you can't afford the payment, that's why sales have been at record lows in 2025, 2024, and 2023. No one was buying homes. It came to a screeching halt in the summer of 2022 because interest rates pushed past 5% and things became unaffordable. And if things aren't affordable for the average person to buy, well, guess what? no one's gonna fucking buy. So being in a buyer's market means two things. Number one, it means that sellers who are serious need to be offering concessions. And number two, it means that buyers, in my opinion, because we have so much inventory, should not be picky and instead should find a few houses that they like and can deal with. And the reason for this is that if you put out 3 offers that are maybe a little bit below market or a little bit below what they're asking, you have the chance of winning that bid and winning that property because one of those sellers is going to be realistic and not going to be pie in the sky trying to get a bunch of money for their property, and they're not going to take that offer because they're just being greedy, as you know they should be. I mean, you'd be greedy too if it's like your property and you want to get the most money for it. But some people just aren't realistic, and so they're asking too much for their property. And so as a buyer, this actually becomes an advantage to you because there's so much inventory right now to choose from. The whole narrative of, oh, we have record low inventory doesn't actually apply anymore. And the reason we have record high inventory, literally this is the highest inventory we've had on record ever, is because the sellers that couldn't sell in 2023, guess what? They get added to the selling pool in 2024. And those same sellers that were still stubborn in 2024 and didn't want to lower their prices, they finally lowered a little bit in 2025. But guess what? Their price in 2025 was what it was priced at, or, you know, maybe what they could have priced it at in 2023 to actually sell it. And so they're just not realistic and they take a while to sell. And so they keep lowering the price incrementally, but it's still way overpriced, and so as a result, they don't get any activity on the house, they don't get it sold, and overall inventory goes up. And as a result, the situation gets worse because more homes get sold. Comps actually supporting what that house is worth actually go down because the homes that are selling are actually selling for less. And so it becomes a vicious cycle for that seller that's just being so stubborn they don't want to lower the price. They end up being in a worse position than if they had just bit the bullet the first year and priced it appropriately so that it was priced to sell. Because what happens is if you find yourself in this vicious cycle where you're just pricing it over market because you don't want to deal with reality of where the actual market is, by the time you lower it low enough to actually sell, you took a major hit on the price, maybe 20-30% from the top of what you were originally asking. And if you had just taken a 15% hit that first year you were trying to sell it, you might have actually gotten it sold because that would have been below market at that time. So the bottom line is be aggressive with your offers, make multiple offers. And when I say be aggressive, I don't mean be aggressive in the sense of go over asking. I mean be aggressive in being shrewd and being a little cheap and being aggressive and finding multiple properties that you can deal with and looking at what's priced appropriately. The truth is that if you find a house, you know, that is priced below market, you might not ask for a discount on that house or put it on an offer below asking because it's going to have a lot of activity. We have properties right now that are going under contract within a handful of days if they're priced very aggressively. And then we also have the properties that sit for 9 months because the seller's on crack. And so the good news is it's a buyer's market. Whatever you buy this year, just know that you're likely going to be able to refinance in a few years. So you can expect a little bit lower payment once you get that interest rate down. One caveat is, though, you want to make sure that you buy that house at an appropriate price, because if you don't, you won't have enough equity in order to refinance, and that's a key point that a lot of people will leave out. And this comes down to making sure that whoever's representing you in the transaction as a buyer's agent knows the market and knows it well and can articulate it to you well and explain to you what the price per square foot is in the metro and where to come in with an offer, so that way you're coming in with an aggressive price, you're getting a property that you can afford, and you're set up for success because you can refinance later and get that payment down even lower and enjoy a house that's affordable long term. And if you want to know where the market is going or what your market is doing, and as promised earlier, there's a video popping up on the screen shortly that will talk about specific housing markets and go through all the data and do a deep dive on the various metros so you can see whether or not you are in a buyer's market or a seller's market. And if you leave a comment in that video with your market that you want me to cover, we'll actually make some other videos that will cover those specific markets for you so you know exactly how to buy and sell appropriately. And if you happen to be in the Denver area and you want to know how I'm helping first-time buyers by giving away some of my commissions towards closing costs and down payment assistance, there's a link in the description with more information on how you can connect. Or if you know anyone in the Denver area, if you're not in that, you can share this video with them and I'm sure they'll appreciate you doing so. Catch you on the next one. Peace.